Right, okay. Not great at talking at public things, so I'm going to try and keep it quite quick. Okay, so I'm Dan. I'm a photographer based in London, not far from here. Do still life photography, advertising, and editor, all sorts of things. And I did an installation for Design Week, just gone in September. It was a project I've been thinking about for a little while, and it was basically called the First Law of Kipple. Here are some of the pictures. It was a series of 6 large-scale images, and then we also did an installation, like a big installation. And it's a lot of objects, a lot of things. That's the installation in the studio. The idea originally, it's kind of based on this term Kipple, which is a term coined by Philip K. Dick in the book To Android's Dream of Electric Sheep. But the idea of the technique of just putting this stuff together, although it's not particularly original, was kind of came from a book cover that I did earlier on in the year for a guy called Mark. I can't actually say his name still, even though I've been working. I did this in February. I'm going to try and say it. Mark Miod. I can't do it. Anybody got any idea? Mark Miodonik. I can't say it. So I'm going to say quickly. Mark Miodonik. A very nice guy, and he's a material scientist, and he did this book about materials, and we had to they wanted to show all the materials that were covered in the book. So we had this idea of just grouping things to color, so that was this gentle kind of color movement across this kind of this image. Okay. There's Philip K. Dick, and there's the book. That's the original book from 1968, I think it was. So this term Kipple, this comes from this book, and it basically kind of describes the detritus and the kind of stuff that surrounds us in everyday life that just kind of accumulates, like receipts and rubbish and just junk, really. I'm going to read it out here. There you go, that's a better way of doing it. That's what he describes it as. Kipple is useless objects like junk mail or match folders after you lose the last match, or gum wrappers or yesterday's newspaper. When nobody's around, Kipple reproduces itself. The entire universe is moving towards a final state of total, absolute Kippleization. And I think, we can all kind of relate to the idea of just this stuff, like this. There's a lot of stuff out there, and in our lives, this stuff gets everywhere. And there's this other quote in the book: "No one can win against Kipple," he said, "except temporarily and maybe in one spot." And that's kind of the quote that brought me on to doing the project, and then thinking about just gathering all this stuff and then trying to kind of control it and organize it and classify it. There's some more of it. These kind of reds and browns. And nothing was sprayed or funny business like that. These are just the straight images. It's about 8 meters across in the back there. So it's kind of lots of stuff. The idea was also to, this stuff to kind of coalesce into these big movements of color across the image, and they're kind of at the, first of all, not to see really the objects, but obviously just to see color and texture. And then as you kind of look closely, you can pick things out, like an old photograph or a funny little doll or whatever it might be. Okay. This is the red to yellow things. One interesting thing was, as well, is as we were collecting stuff, the different colors tended to kind of point you towards different kind of objects. So reds, primary reds, yellows, oranges was all plastic things. It seems kind of obvious, but it's kind of interesting when you're doing it, all this stuff just kind of happening. The stuff like kind of, the brownier colors and darker stuff, like black stuff, tended to be electronics. The darker browns tended to be wood things or brass or older things. So they started to fall into kind of categories of when these things were from. Oops. So we had this, just a system of organizing. I'll talk about the process a little bit. The system for organizing it, because we had to, I think we basically filled a shipping container with stuff. And we sourced it via people going out and finding things at car boot sales, people sending us stuff, charities sending us stuff that they didn't need. And we had to have a kind of system for organizing it, and I created this kind of color grid, and then we kind of worked out what we needed by stuff coming in, getting packaged up, and then getting sent to storage. And it was this weird thing, because the 2 months that we were kind of collating everything, it kind of felt it was a bit horrible, to be honest, in the studio, because all this stuff was coming in and it got everywhere. It was just total chaos, because there was nowhere to move. Because you can see from the early picture of the studio, it's like that space needed to be filled up, so everything was just everywhere, to move a lot of stuff around. It kind of gives you an idea of all of the stuff and the boxes being filled up, and so there was literally nowhere to move. I just did that, so I thought everybody go, oh, there's my son walking through the Kipple, the precarious Kipple. And then going back to that line, I'm also a bit into science. You know, I've kind of been reading science a long time, and a lot of my influence and ideas come from science. And I like this idea that also, and I'd read about this, that this idea of Kipple kind of reminded me of the Second Law of Thermodynamics, which is a kind of theory explaining about how heat works in the universe and how things go from, you know, how about processes work and about how they're fueled. And that kind of also reminded me of this line. I was listening to a radio program called the In Our Time radio program on Radio 4, and with Melvin Bragg, and there's a scientist there called Peter Atkins. And in context of discussing Second Law of Thermodynamics, he said all life on Earth is basically a local abatement of chaos, of entropy. So the universe as a bigger picture is moving towards disorder. And the Earth as this system, the biosphere, is kind of a pocket of order, you know, within this, basically this larger movement of disorder. And there's nothing you can really do about it. It's like, it's happening and that's the way it is. So I thought I'd just quickly go through thermodynamics. I find it really interesting. Everybody else probably finds it a little bit boring. I didn't even get science GCSE, so I'm probably not best equipped to talk about it. I also managed to get probably one of the only people who's retaken the GCSE and got a worse grade, which is, I think it's kind of an academic kind of Kipple, I think. It's all that effort for nothing. So this is, the first law of thermodynamics is this: the energy in a closed system, i.e. the universe, is constant, cannot be created or destroyed, just change from one type to another. And then the second law is that the heat will flow from a hotter to a colder body, or go from an ordered to disordered state. High disorder, high entropy. Einstein said about this, it's the only physical theory of universal content which I'm convinced will never be overthrown within the framework and applicability of its basic concepts. So it was being, you know, absorbed, and it's one of the big theories. It's a beautiful theory, and I think it's always going to be that way. Then I was thinking, also reading online about these things, doing a bit of research, as you do. I remember years ago reading about Kipple being described as domestic entropy, and I really like that. I like this kind of, they seem to be really involved with each other's terms. And I read this line, I don't know who wrote this, but he says, in the 21st century, we seem to be working as hard as we can to take available resources and transform them into objects that cannot be used for anything, which is Kipple. I'd like to also say, I probably didn't say this enough, but the kind of, when I was formulating this project, I kind of took the Kipple definition a little bit further also in terms of objects and things, because I wanted to coincide this show for London Design Week. London Design Week's always about just new things, chairs that are slightly different, lampshades that are slightly different. I thought it'd be interesting to just extend it to things that are basically useless by their design or by their state. So maybe by the way they're designed, they just happen to be useless. They're not useful for anything at all. This is the kind of brown, beige to kind of brown to black images. Okay. When we were doing this project, we had to obviously find a lot of Kipple, but we had to make sure that we were actually getting Kipple. We didn't want to just get any old stuff in there that was just a certain colour. So we had this kind of big list of things that, is it Kipple, basically? And we did a call out for it. Is its purpose purely ornamental? Could its function be replaced by a very small amount of human effort, intelligence, i.e. that? It's not gross, is it? But it's kind of fucking ridiculous at the same time. And it's kind of shiny and sleek and modern. I didn't want to put something too horrible in there. I wanted something that was kind of nice. But £15.50 plus shipping. It's pretty horrible. Like, do you really need that? No, you probably don't really need that. Anyway, so it seemed suitable to kind of do this thing during Design Week. And originally, actually, I had no idea about doing the installation, but I realized that if I wanted to cover such a big square and fill it with so much stuff that I needed so much stuff that I thought, well, I might as well do an installation of Design Week at the same time. It's a nice thing to people to see, and why not? Anyway, this idea of design and people buying things that they don't need kind of goes back quite a long way. This is Victor Papanek said this in the 70s. I know it's quite funny I'm saying this. I mean, I work in advertising photography. I'm not trying to lecture anybody or anything. I'm part of the problem, not the solution. I kind of very much realize that. But I'm just interested in why we do these, you know, why we buy all these things. why we need them and what kind of effect it has on us, I suppose. But there is this, people are kind of doing stuff, and there's a little bit of a work against the tide. I think there's been a recent trend in design maybe to start making things, out of existing stuff, or start questioning like how much do we need to actually make all this new stuff. There's Martino Gamper's chairs that he made from old chairs, which is quite interesting in terms of reusing things. This is Mental Design. They made this thing on the left, which is it's basically you can make a chair out of any stuff you've got lying about, which I thought was quite nice. And this is Victor Papanek. He made this radio that was made from old juice cans and some kind of funny little bit of fuel, even dry cow dung, and you can get a radio from this. Right, brilliant thing. So these ideas in design are not new. They've been around for a while, using it in a good way. And then I also came across this, which in the report confirms no need to make new chairs for the time being, which I thought was quite funny, because it's one of those things, once you actually hear it said, you don't really think about it, and you're like, yeah, we don't need any more chairs, do we? We don't need any more chairs. I like that. I like the way it says, a study of American homes, offices, dining establishments, public spaces, and patios. I like the patios bit, has determined that for now the nation has plenty of chairs and can get by just fine with the chairs it already possesses. So, there you go. Anyway, so one of these ideas, when I was researching into, why we need these things, I was looking a little bit into, without going too heavily into it, I'm not sure how long I've got left, a little bit. So there's this theory of reification, which is basically in Gestalt psychology, it's about kind of inventing something from limited kind of stimulus or stimuli. So there you perceive a triangle, but there's not actually any triangle there, it's just that you perceive it. And I think that kind of also relates to things that we kind of, a lot of times we kind of attach significance to objects that maybe they don't deserve. Let's carry on. That's this thing again. There we go here. I was kind of, as part of the project, it was a nice idea, the idea of reification, and I kind of wanted to include it somehow in there, but it was tricky to get it in there. But we did actually, just in the path, I don't know if you can see that the path, we needed a path through the space. So it's actually made up of these kind of semi-made shapes. So it's actually kind of full of these semi-made shapes. Some people, it was a funny thing to do. It's quite a difficult idea getting that into the space, into the project, but it was kind of used in that way. Right. And I've been asking a lot of questions, while doing this project, like why we need all these things. And desire all these objects. And I think, having reading about it a lot, I think that a lot of it is probably down to, probably habits that will happen when we were hunting and gathering a long time ago, 50,000 years ago, when we were genetically basically identical. The same way that obesity is basically due to the body's addiction to energy-rich food, because we needed that when we were running around. And same with objects. I guess if you're in the middle of the forest or in wherever, you probably need to know what everything does. It kind of makes sense to need to know all these things. So I think in the end, it's kind of, maybe it's just one of those things that's just the way it is, and that's the way it will always be. We'll always need these things. We'll always attach a significance to these objects. And there you go. That's it, and that's the line that kind of ended it. That's where it came from, the line, the first law of Kipple. Kipple drives out non-Kipple, which is, I think, slightly depressing, but probably very true. And that's that. Thank you.